and welcome to a place where the past becomes present and history's greatest minds speak for themselves. Today, we step back to a time of profound change when the very purpose of power was being questioned. In our world, the relationship between the people and their government is often fraught with tension. We debate the balance of freedom and authority, the limits of the state, and the source of our rights. But where do these rights truly come from? Are they granted by a ruler, or do they exist independently, woven into the very fabric of our humanity? To answer these questions, we must journey back to a moment that laid the intellectual groundwork for modern democracy, to a man who argued that liberty is not a gift, but a natural inheritance. Today, we sit down with John Locke to explore his groundbreaking work, Two Treatises of Government, and discuss why government must be a servant of the people, dedicated to protecting our natural rights. Born in 1632 in Somerset, England, John Locke was raised in a time of political and religious upheaval. He studied at Oxford, where he immersed himself in the classics, medicine, and the burgeoning scientific movement of his day. His intellectual curiosity led him to befriend figures like Robert Boyle and Isaac Newton, shaping his belief in reason and empirical observation. As a physician and advisor to the prominent Lord Shaftesbury, Locke found himself at the center of English politics. His involvement in political intrigue forced him into exile in the Netherlands, a period that proved to be incredibly fertile for his writing. It was there that he developed his most influential ideas on governance and human nature, culminating in the publication of his two masterpieces, an essay concerning human understanding and, most importantly for our conversation, Two Treatises of Government. His work became a foundational text for the Enlightenment, influencing thinkers and revolutionaries from America to France and shaping the course of modern history. Our conversation today will be centered on John Locke's Two Treatises of Government. Published anonymously in 1689, this work was a powerful refutation of absolute monarchy and a defense of individual liberty. The first treatise systematically dismantled the idea of the divine right of kings, while the second treatise, which we will focus on, laid out a revolutionary vision for civil society. In this text, Locke introduces his core ideas: the state of nature, the existence of natural rights, and the concept of a social contract as the basis for legitimate government. This book's ideas became the intellectual blueprint for modern liberal democracy.
Mr. Locke, it is an honor to have this conversation. Your Two Treatises of Government has fundamentally shaped our understanding of governance. I want to start with a concept you introduce at the beginning of your work, the state of nature. How do you envision this state?
The state of nature is a condition of perfect freedom and equality. In this state, men are free to order their actions and dispose of their possessions as they see fit, within the bounds of the law of nature. It is not a state of war, as some others might suggest, but a state of reason. Every individual has the right to preserve their own life, liberty, and property.
This brings us to your core argument that all men are born with natural rights. Which rights are these, and why are they so fundamental?
I speak of the rights to life, liberty, and property. These are not granted by any king or government. They are inherent and inalienable. They exist because of the law of nature, which teaches all mankind that no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. Property, in particular, is the fruit of one's labor. For a man, by mixing his labor with something in the state of nature, makes it his own.
But if we have these rights in the state of nature, why do we need a government at all?
Because in that state, while we have the rights, we lack a common, impartial judge to resolve disputes. Each man is both judge and executioner of the law of nature, and this can lead to a state of inconvenience where our rights are constantly insecure. Men therefore agree to form a civil society to secure their property and to provide that impartial judge.
And this is where the social contract comes in?
Exactly. The social contract is not a surrender of our rights, but an agreement among men to give up the power of executing the law of nature to a common body. We enter into this contract to preserve our natural rights more effectively. The government's authority, therefore, is derived from the consent of the governed, not from divine right.
So if a government fails to protect these rights or becomes tyrannical, what is the recourse for the people?
If the legislative or executive powers violate the trust placed in them, if they act contrary to the very ends for which they were established, which is the preservation of life, liberty, and property, then the people have the right to dissolve that government. The power ultimately remains with the people. It is the people who have the right to set up a new legislative.
This is a truly revolutionary idea. How would you apply your principle of property today? The nature of property has changed so much.
The principle remains the same. A man has a right to that which he has mixed his labor with, whether it is a physical farm or a piece of code that he has created with his mind and effort. It is his property. The key is that it is a direct product of his industry, so long as he leaves enough and as good in common for others.
What is your view on the purpose of laws?
The end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. For in all the states of created beings capable of laws, where there is no law, there is no freedom. Law, rightly understood, is a guide for a rational being, not a shackle.
You place a great emphasis on religious tolerance. Why was this so important to you?
I believe that true faith cannot be coerced. The magistrate's authority extends only to civil matters, not to the salvation of souls. The Church is a voluntary society, and the state should not meddle in its affairs. Forcing a man to believe something he does not is both ineffective and a violation of his liberty.
You famously argued against the divine right of kings. Why was this theory so dangerous?
The theory of divine right is a great evil because it places the king above the law and beyond the reach of his people. It claims that a king's power is absolute and that his authority is granted by God, not by the people. This is a denial of the fundamental truth that all men are equal and that government's only purpose is to serve the people. It is a philosophy that justifies tyranny and enslavement.
So to you, a legitimate government must be a republic or a constitutional monarchy.
The specific form of government is less important than its purpose. A government is legitimate only if it serves the people and protects their rights. A republic and a constitutional monarchy can both be legitimate, so long as they are based on the consent of the governed and the rule of law.
What is the role of the majority in your system?
The majority has the right to act and conclude for the rest. When men enter into a social contract, they are giving up their right to be a lone judge and executioner, and are agreeing to be bound by the will of the majority. The majority's power is not absolute, however. It must still act to protect the natural rights of every individual, including those in the minority.
You speak of the right to property. Can one person own a vast amount of property while others have little?
A man has a right to the fruit of his labor, but this is limited. There is a spoilage limitation. You can't take more than you can use before it spoils. But with the invention of money, this limitation is removed. However, I maintain that property is ultimately a tool for self-preservation, and a society should be structured to ensure that everyone has the means to secure their own life and liberty.
What do you see as the greatest threat to a stable government?
The greatest threat is when a government acts contrary to the trust placed in it by the people. When a ruler uses his power for his own gain or attempts to make himself an absolute king, he puts himself in a state of war with his own people. This act of betrayal is the ultimate cause of instability, for it justifies the people's right to revolution.
How do your ideas connect to the great documents of freedom that came after you, like the American Declaration of Independence?
I am humbled to see my ideas so powerfully expressed. The Declaration's assertion that all men are created equal and that they are endowed with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, is a direct echo of my own philosophy. I am a firm believer that these truths are self-evident and that they must be the foundation of any free nation.
Mr. Locke, in our time, we see new forms of property, like digital data and intellectual property. How would your principles of natural rights apply to these new challenges?
The principle of mixing one's labor with something to make it one's own remains sound. The creation of code, a digital image, or a new invention is a profound act of labor of the mind. Therefore, the creator has a natural right to this property. However, the state, which is meant to be a common impartial judge, must work to define and protect these new forms of property in a way that benefits the whole of society, and does not create new forms of tyranny or inequality. The law must evolve to protect the rights of individuals in this new landscape, just as it did in my time.
In your time, you argued for the right to revolution against a tyrannical government. What is your perspective on nonviolent civil disobedience, which is used today to challenge unjust laws without resorting to violence?
I would see nonviolent civil disobedience as a powerful and legitimate expression of the people's right to resist an unjust government. When a government acts without the consent of the governed and infringes upon their rights, the people have the right to resist. If this can be done without resorting to violence, it is all the better, for it shows the moral strength of the people and the illegitimacy of the government's actions. It is a more civilized, but no less profound way of exercising the people's ultimate power.
And so our dialogue with John Locke concludes. His wisdom, captured in his 2 treatises of government, continues to resonate, providing the intellectual blueprint for many of the world's democratic societies. He challenged the notion that power flows from above, and instead argued that it originates from the people, who, by their consent, empower a government to protect their fundamental rights. Locke's legacy is a profound reminder that the purpose of government is not to rule, but to serve. His ideas about natural rights, the social contract, and the right to revolution against tyranny are not just historical concepts, they are the bedrock of our modern understanding of freedom and justice. They remind us that the liberty we cherish is not a given, but a right that must be constantly protected. Thank you for joining us, and until we next sit down with a mind that shaped our world.